Hi there, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to a grand emperor's court or a bustling forum, but to a quieter, more intimate, and often unsettling corner of ancient Rome. Imagine yourself there, suddenly transported. You're not a legionary marching to glory, nor a senator holding sway in the curia. Instead, you find yourself within the opulent, yet rigidly hierarchical, confines of a powerful Roman household. Perhaps a sprawling villa on the Palatine Hill, or a more modest, though still impressive, dwelling in a quieter part of the city. The air is thick with the scent of olive oil and exotic spices, perhaps a hint of jasmine from an inner courtyard. Servants move silently through the marbled halls, their bare feet whispering on the cool stone. You might hear the distant murmur of Latin voices or the gentle splash of a fountain. This isn't a world of your making, and your place within it is both privileged and profoundly precarious. You are seen, but perhaps not truly known, desired, yet entirely disposable. It's a delicate balance, one you're forced to navigate every single day. And just a cheeky reality check. In this era, you probably wouldn't survive a week without a patron, let alone a lifetime. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might find yourself dressed in fine tunics, perhaps even with a delicate chain or a piece of jewelry given by your patron. Your hair might be meticulously styled, your skin cared for with fragrant oils. You could be lounging on a cushioned divan, perhaps by a window overlooking a vibrant garden, or in a private chamber, waiting for a summons. The silence can be profound, broken only by the chirping of cicadas outside or the distant city hum. This seemingly peaceful scene, however, belies a constant underlying tension. You are a concubinus, a term in ancient Rome that, in your specific context, denotes a younger man or boy kept by a more powerful man for sexual and sometimes emotional companionship. Unlike the formal institution of concubinatus for male-female unions, which had some legal standing, your position as a concubinus held no such protections. It was informal, driven by personal desire and power dynamics, and entirely at the discretion of your patron. You are not a wife, not a recognized partner, and certainly not an equal. Your role is primarily one of pleasure and availability, a living ornament within a powerful man's life. Historians still argue whether the concubinus always implies a younger individual. But certainly the power differential was key. You are not just a person. You are a possession in many ways. This fact, while perhaps softened by outward luxuries, is the bedrock of your daily existence. Your status, or rather your lack thereof, is perhaps the most defining characteristic of your life as a concubinus. Unlike the Roman institution of matrimonium, legal marriage, or even the semi-recognized concubinatus, a long-term, non-marital union between a man and a woman, often of different social standings, that still carried some social acceptance and limited legal implications, especially concerning inheritance for offspring. Your particular arrangement has no official standing. Absolutely none. You are, in essence, a private indulgence. The term concubinus itself, when referring to male-male relationships, carries a different weight. It's less about a stable partnership and more about a power dynamic, an older, more powerful man taking a younger one. You are, in a very real sense, defined by this informal, often unspoken, contract. It's a bit like having a friends with benefits arrangement, except one party owns the other, controls their every move, and could decide to end the arrangement and your very existence on a whim. Talk about uneven playing fields, right? This informal nature means you have no legal recourse, no formal protections that a wife or even a female concubina might possess. If your patron decides he no longer wants you, or if he takes a new fancy, you could find yourself cast out, sold, or simply ignored. There's no alimony, no shared property, no its complicated Facebook status to soften the blow. Your world is built on the shifting sands of your patron's affection and his societal standing. Historians still argue whether the term concubinage always implied a sexual relationship, or if it could sometimes refer to a purely companionate one, but in most contexts, it's safe to say that sexual availability was a primary expectation. You are a commodity, and your value is tied directly to your patron's desire and pride. You might find yourself accompanying your patron to the public baths, or to a private dinner party, but your presence isn't as an equal guest. You're there as an extension of his status, a silent testament to his wealth and influence. Think of it like a very expensive, very beautiful accessory. One day you're in vogue, the next you're relegated to a dusty chest. It's a peculiar tidbit of Roman social structure, where certain relationships were openly acknowledged but legally invisible. This invisibility, paradoxically, is what grants your patron so much control and you so little. Now, let's consider the most prevalent scenario for a concubinus. You are a slave. This isn't just a detail. It is the fundamental, crushing reality that dictates every breath you take. As an enslaved individual in ancient Rome, you are considered property, not a person with rights, but an object, a chattel, no different in the eyes of the law than a piece of furniture or a particularly well-bred horse. Your body, your labor, your very while belong to your owner. This isn't just a legal abstraction, it's a lived, brutal truth. Your life, down to the most intimate details, is entirely at the whim of your patron, who holds the dual role of owner and lover. It's a power dynamic that is, to put it mildly, terrifyingly absolute. Imagine waking up each morning, not knowing what the day holds, or what mood your master might be in. There's no union, no workers' rights, no legal aid society to call upon if things go south. If your patron decides to inflict physical or emotional abuse, there is virtually no one you can turn to. The state will not intervene. Your fellow slaves are often too preoccupied with their own precarious existences to offer meaningful help, and free Romans would simply see it as a master exercising his rightful authority over his property. It's a bit like being a pet goldfish in a very large, very beautiful bowl. You might have pretty pebbles and a little castle, but ultimately, your existence is entirely dependent on the person who drops the food flakes in, and who could, at any moment, decide to flush you. A peculiar tidbit about Roman slavery is the sheer diversity of roles slaves could hold, from highly educated tutors to brutal miners. But for you, the intimacy of your servitude adds another layer of vulnerability. This precariousness extends to your very presence in the household. Your patron could sell you at any time, for any reason, or no reason at all. You could be traded for debt, given as a gift, or simply disposed of if you fall out of favor. One day you might be enjoying the relative comforts of a wealthy Roman villa. The next you could find yourself shackled and marched to a slave market, destined for a gladiatorial school or a life of back-breaking labor in the fields. Historians still argue whether some patrons felt a moral obligation towards their enslaved concubine, beyond mere self-interest, but evidence suggests such kindness was entirely discretionary and rarely provided any real security. You exist in a gilded cage, if you're lucky, but a cage nonetheless, with the bars unseen until it's too late. The comfort you might experience, the fine clothes, the good food, are not rights, but privileges, granted and rescinded at a moment's notice, making every single moment of your life a negotiation for your continued, precarious existence. The absolute power wielded by your Roman patron is the sun around which your entire world orbits. This isn't a reciprocal relationship. It's a hierarchy, steep and unforgiving, with you firmly at the very bottom. Your patron, whether a prominent senator, a wealthy merchant, or even a rising equestrian, embodies paterfamilias, the head of the family, a legal concept that grants him immense authority over his household, including his slaves. For you, an enslaved concubiness, this means his will is law, his desires are commands, and his whims are destiny. You are, in every legal and practical sense, an extension of his property, your very existence defined by his ownership. Imagine a subtle shift in his gaze, a slight tightening of his lips, and your heart might pound with apprehension. Every gesture, every word he utters holds immense weight. A compliment could mean continued favor and comfort. A frown could signal impending disfavor, perhaps even punishment. You learn to read his moods with an almost psychic sensitivity, anticipating his needs before he even vocalizes them. It's a survival mechanism, a constant, low-level anxiety that permeates your days and nights. This power extends to the most intimate aspects of your life. Your body is not your own. It is his to command. You might be summoned at any hour, day or night, and expected to comply without question, without hesitation. It's a peculiar tidbit of Roman law that while a free Roman man was expected to be the active partner in sexual relations, the passive partner, particularly if enslaved, was considered to have no agency or shame in the matter, precisely because they were property. This complete subservience means you have no voice, no rights to protest, no ability to refuse. If your patron's affections wander, or if he becomes bored, there's nothing you can do. You might be replaced by a younger, fairer face, or simply relegated to other, less desirable duties within the household. Historians still argue whether there were unwritten social codes that might have offered a slave some modicum of protection against the most extreme abuses, but such protections, if they existed at all, were fragile and entirely dependent on the individual patron's moral compass, which varied wildly. You are adrift on a sea of your patron's desires, with no anchor, no map, and no true control over your own destination. Your entire existence hinges on maintaining his favor, a precarious dance where a misstep could lead to ruin. So, what does a typical day look like for you, an enslaved male concubine, within the sprawling confines of a Roman household? There is no single answer, of course, as your daily routines are meticulously crafted by your patron's personal preferences, his social standing, and the sheer size and complexity of his domestic world. However, one constant remains. Your existence is interwoven with his. You do not wake up and plan your own day. Your day unfolds in response to his needs, his schedule, and his desires. You might be roused before dawn, not by an alarm, but by the subtle stirrings of the household. Perhaps a senior slave, a dispensator, or a villicus might give you specific instructions. Your first duties might involve preparing your patron's morning toilette. You could be responsible for fetching warm water, preparing his clothes, or assisting with his shaving and grooming. Imagine the intimate proximity, the quiet precision required as you lay out his toga. Smooth its intricate folds, or perhaps even apply the scented oils he prefers. This is not just a chore. It is an act of service that places you in immediate, personal contact with the man who controls your destiny. This early interaction sets the tone for your entire day. After his morning routine, your duties could diverge significantly. If your patron is politically active, you might accompany him to the forum, a silent shadow as he conducts business, or to the public baths, where you would assist him with his bathing rituals, perhaps holding his strigil or anointing him with oils. A peculiar tidbit is that even highly educated slaves, often referred to as pedagogy or librari, who served as tutors or scribes, could also find themselves in positions of concubinage. Their intellectual skills were valued, but their bodies remained property. So, you might spend hours copying texts, reciting poetry, or engaging in philosophical discussions, only to be summoned for far more intimate duties later. Historians still argue whether there was a distinct class of enslaved concubines, or if it was simply a role assumed by certain male slaves based on their appearance or their master's preference. Your life is a tapestry woven from moments of luxurious idleness and intense personal servitude, all under the ever-present shadow of your master's command. You are always on call, always observing, always anticipating. Your life as a concubiness is a strange, often disorienting blend of comfort and profound cruelty, a constant tightrope walk between indulgence and impending doom. On one hand, you might experience a level of luxury and ease that few free Romans, let alone other slaves, could ever dream of. Imagine living within a grand villa, adorned with frescoes and mosaics, warmed by underfloor heating in winter, and cooled by expertly designed airflow in summer. You might wear fine clothes, tailored to fit, and eat exquisite food-delicate pastries, roasted meats, exotic fruits from your patron's table, far superior to the coarse bread and gruel that sustained most of the urban poor. You might even have access to education, learning Greek or rhetoric, if your patron values such intellectual companionship. This isn't just about survival. It's about a gilded existence. Yet, beneath this veneer of comfort lies an inescapable, fundamental cruelty, your utter lack of agency. These comforts are not rights. They are privileges, bestowed and revoked at your patron's whim. You might sleep in a comfortable bed one night, and the next, after a perceived slight or a change of mood, find yourself relegated to a rough pallet, in a drafty storeroom, or worse, sold to a brutal mining operation. The fine clothes, the rich food, the beautiful surroundings, they are all part of your commodification, making you a more desirable possession for your patron, or a more valuable asset if he decides to sell you. It's a bit like a prized show. Dog fed the best food, groomed meticulously, given a plush bed, but ultimately, it's still property, its purpose dictated by its owner. A peculiar tidbit: some very wealthy Romans were known to have extravagant slave houses, or even dedicate entire sections of their villas to their most favored, including concubines, complete with their own smaller living quarters and amenities. This duality means every moment of apparent ease is tinged with anxiety. You might be enjoying a lavish banquet, participating in witty banter, but always, one eye is on your patron, gauging his mood, anticipating his needs. Any slight deviation from his expectation Any hint of perceived disrespect could shatter your fragile existence. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of this constant insecurity was greater than the physical hardships faced by other slaves. But it's clear that the mental burden was immense. The comfort is a deceptive cage, offering temporary respite but never true freedom, reminding you with every soft pillow and every delicious mouthful that your life is not your own. In ancient Rome, especially within the context of your role as a concubiness, your physical appearance is not merely a matter of personal vanity. It is, quite literally, your currency. Youth, beauty, and a certain undefinable charm are paramount. Your patron's desire for you is often sparked by these outward attributes, and maintaining them becomes an unspoken, yet absolutely critical, part of your daily existence. You are, in essence, a living sculpture, constantly maintained to please the eye and the whims of your owner. Imagine the meticulous care taken with your body. You might be regularly bathed in scented waters, your skin smoothed with olive oil, perhaps even plucked of unwanted hair, a common practice for aesthetic appeal in Roman society. Your hair would be carefully styled, perhaps curled or anointed with fragrant unguents. Even your clothing, though prescribed by your patron, would likely be of fine linen or wool, clean and well maintained to highlight your figure. The emphasis isn't just on cleanliness, but on an idealized aesthetic that aligns with contemporary Roman notions of beauty for a male companion. This might include a slender build, delicate features, and a youthful, almost innocent visage. It's a bit like a competitive beauty pageant, except the judge is your owner, and the prize is your continued, precarious existence. This constant scrutiny means you are always aware of your body, always conscious of how you present yourself. A blemish, a minor injury, or even the subtle onset of age could diminish your value in your patron's eyes, and thus your very security. A peculiar tidbit is that some Roman patrons were known to send their favored slaves, including concubines, to receive specialized training, not just in intellectual pursuits, but also in physical disciplines like dance or athletics, further enhancing their appeal and utility. Historians still argue whether some concubini might have exerted a subtle influence over their patrons through their charm and beauty. But any such power would have been entirely informal and dependent on the patron's individual affections, rather than any inherent right. Your reflection in the polished bronze mirror is more than just an image. It's a constant reminder of your role, your vulnerability, and the exacting standards you must perpetually meet. While your primary role as a concubiness revolves around providing sexual and emotional gratification, your duties often extend far beyond the confines of the bedroom. You are, in many ways, a multifaceted companion, integrated into the social fabric of your patron's life. Think of it as being a highly specialized personal assistant, but with a deeply intimate and utterly subordinate twist. Your presence enhances your patron's image, caters to his comfort, and fulfills a broader need for companionship that might not be met by his wife, his children, or his male friends. You might find yourself accompanying your patron to social gatherings, like dinner parties or banquets, where you would sit beside him, a silent, attentive presence. While you wouldn't typically engage in the main conversations, you would be expected to anticipate his needs, refilling his cup, fetching a dish, or simply offering a comforting glance. You are part of the scenery, yes, but a very important part, signaling his taste and his wealth to his peers. Your quiet attentiveness is a performance in itself, a subtle display of devotion that reflects well on him. It's a bit like being a living, breathing accessory that subtly elevates the Status of the wearer. A peculiar tidbit. Some patrons specifically sought concubini, who possessed qualities like a melodious voice for singing or graceful movements for dancing, turning them into living entertainment for their guests. Beyond social events, you might also serve as a private confidant, a sounding board for your patron's thoughts, worries, or ambitions. Perhaps he finds a unique solace in your presence, someone who listens without judgment or ambition, precisely because you have no power to challenge him. You might spend hours simply sitting with him, offering quiet company while he reads, writes, or contemplates. This intimate companionship, free from the political machinations of his public life or the domestic duties of his wife, can be a valuable aspect of your role. Historians still argue whether these emotional bonds, if genuine, ever offered a measure of reciprocal affection or even a subtle form of influence for the concubiness. But any such influence would always have been unofficial and entirely dependent on the individual patron's character and affections, never on your inherent rights. Your existence is one of constant availability, whether for physical intimacy, social display, or simply a comforting, silent presence. Some Roman patrons, particularly those of refined taste or intellectual bent, sought more from their concubini than mere physical presence or companionship. For these individuals, you might find yourself expected to engage in a deeper, more cerebral connection, elevating your role beyond purely domestic or sexual service. This wasn't a universal expectation, of course, but it speaks to the diverse range of needs that a wealthy Roman might seek to fulfill through his household. Imagine being summoned not for a bath, but for a discussion. Your patron might have a keen interest in philosophy, poetry, or history, and he desires a sharp mind to engage with, a cultivated voice to listen to, or even a talented hand to copy texts. You might spend hours in his private library, reading aloud from scrolls, debating a point of Stoic philosophy, or analyzing the meter of a Greek epic. Your ability to engage intelligently, to offer insightful comments, or simply to be a knowledgeable audience would be highly valued. This intellectual engagement is a peculiar tidbit, highlighting that even within the confines of slavery, some individuals could cultivate and utilize their intellectual abilities, even if ultimately for their master's benefit. It's a bit like being a living, breathing encyclopedia, but one that can also provide intimate comfort. This aspect of your role could be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it might offer a degree of mental stimulation and a sense of purpose beyond purely physical duties. You might gain access to education, to rare texts, and to conversations that would be utterly inaccessible to most other slaves. On the other hand, it adds another layer of pressure. You must always be prepared, always informed, always ready to impress. Your intellect, like your body, becomes a tool for your patron's gratification. Historians still argue whether such intellectual concubini might have enjoyed a higher social standing within the household, even among other slaves, due to their specialized skills. But this would still be a hierarchy within servitude, not a path to true freedom. Your mind, just like your appearance, is another asset to be utilized by your patron, and its value is entirely determined by his appreciation and his intellectual appetites. While the vast majority of male concubines were enslaved, a smaller, though still significant, number might have been freeborn but of lower social standing, or, crucially, freedmen. This distinction introduces a slightly different, though no less complex, layer to your life as a concubiness. If you are a freedman, you have gained your freedom from slavery, either through manumission by your former master or by purchasing your liberty. This is a monumental step, granting you legal personality and some basic rights that enslaved individuals could only dream of. However, even as a freedman, your past casts a long shadow, and your present often remains deeply entwined with your former patron. As a freedman concubinus, you are no longer property in the legal sense. You cannot be bought or sold, and theoretically, you have the right to own property, enter contracts, and even vote if you meet certain criteria, though your social standing would likely make full participation difficult. This newfound freedom, however, often comes with a caveat, a continuing obligation to your former master, now your patron. This relationship, known as patronage, means you owe him obsequium, deference, and respect, and opere services, which could include continuing to fulfill your role as a It's a bit like finally paying off your massive student loans, only to find you still have to babysit your old professor's kids every weekend, indefinitely. A peculiar tidbit is that manumission was often a public affair, sometimes even celebrated. But it rarely severed the ties of dependence completely. Your position, while legally superior to an enslaved concubinus, is still profoundly dependent. You might gain some economic benefit or social advancement through this ongoing relationship. Perhaps your patron sets you up with a small business, or provides you with an allowance, or even helps you secure a position in his broader network. However, your role is often temporary. This is especially true if your patron eventually marries, or if his interests shift. There's no formal legal commitment for him to maintain you as his concubinus. Historians still argue whether freedmen concubini might have had more leverage to negotiate the terms of their relationships. But any such leverage would have been informal and limited by their continued social and economic reliance on their patron. You might have legal freedom, but the chains of dependence, though invisible, remain strong. Whether enslaved or a freedman, your economic existence as a concubinus is characterized by one overwhelming fact: absolute dependency. You are, for all intents and purposes, financially beholden to your patron. This isn't a partnership where you contribute equally. It's a system where your livelihood, your comforts, and your very survival are entirely at his discretion. You have no independent income, no savings to fall back on, and certainly no retirement plan. Your patron is your sole provider, your bank, and your future. Imagine having no control over your own finances. If you are enslaved, any gifts or allowances you receive are ultimately still your patron's property in the eyes of the law. You cannot own anything, nor can you inherit. If you are a freedman, while you technically have the right to acquire wealth, the reality is often very different. Your patron might provide you with lodging, food, clothing, and perhaps even a small allowance, peculium, for slaves, or a similar informal provision for freedmen, but this generosity is a privilege, not a right. It's a bit like living in a luxurious hotel suite, but having no credit card of your own. All the amenities are there, but the bill is paid by someone else, and they can cut off your access at any moment. A peculiar tidbit is that some freedmen concubini might have been given responsibilities within their patron's business, like managing accounts or overseeing certain ventures, which could offer them a pathway to accumulating some personal wealth. But this was still under the watchful eye of their patron. This economic dependence severely limits your autonomy and agency. You cannot make independent decisions about your future, pursue your own interests, or even leave if you wish. Your life is fundamentally tied to the continuity of your patron's favor. If he ceases to support you, you are left with nothing. Historians still argue whether some concubini managed to amass significant personal wealth or property through gifts or shrewd management, even while dependent, but such cases were likely rare and always vulnerable to the patron's changing mood or financial circumstances. This pervasive economic vulnerability means that even the most comfortable existence is underpinned by a constant, nagging fear of destitution, a fear that keeps you firmly in your place. Now, let's turn to a particularly challenging aspect of your life as a concubiness: public perception and the sting of social shame. While Roman society, especially for men of higher status, was remarkably tolerant of same-sex relationships, there was a crucial distinction. It was perfectly acceptable, even expected, for a free-born Roman man to be the active partner, the penetrator, in a sexual relationship. This demonstrated virility and dominance. However, to be the passive partner, the one being penetrated, was considered deeply shameful, particularly if you were a free-born Roman citizen. For you, as a concubiness, your very role often placed you in this passive position, regardless of your personal desires or the nuances of the intimate act. Imagine walking through the forum, accompanying your patron, and feeling the subtle glances, the hushed whispers. You might be dressed in fine clothes, a testament to your patron's wealth, but beneath the surface, a judgment is being passed. While your patron might face little or no social stigma for keeping you, you are the one who bears the brunt of society's opprobrium. This isn't necessarily overt hostility, but a pervasive, undermining sense of dishonor. It's a bit like being a brilliant artist, but constantly being introduced as the one who paints pretty pictures for that rich guy, stripping you of your own agency and skill. A peculiar tidbit some Roman satirists and moralists would mock. Men who took on passive roles, even in heterosexual contexts, emphasizing the strong cultural value placed on active, dominant masculinity. This social shame means you are likely viewed as infamous, a legal and social status denoting disgrace or dishonor. While not a formal legal conviction, infamia carries serious implications, effectively sidelining you from public life and preventing you from holding political office, participating in certain legal proceedings, or even serving in the military. It closes doors, not with a lock, but with a wall of disapproval. Historians still argue whether the experience of social shame was more acutely felt by freeborn concubini compared to enslaved ones, as enslaved individuals were already legally disenfranchised and without honor to lose. Regardless, for you, it meant navigating a world where you were both desired and, in many social circles, subtly or not so subtly, despised for the very nature of your existence. The concept of infamia, which you, as a concubiness, are likely burdened with, is not a simple matter of public disapproval. It's a social and quasi-legal designation that carries tangible and often devastating consequences for your life in Roman society. While it doesn't necessarily mean you've committed a crime in the modern sense, it signifies a loss of honor and reputation, effectively making you a second-class citizen, even if you are technically a freedman. For enslaved individuals who already possessed no honor in the eyes of the law, the impact was perhaps less direct, but still contributed to their already marginalized status. Imagine wanting to participate in the vibrant public life of Rome, attending assemblies, serving in the legions, or even running for a minor magistrate. As an infamous individual, these avenues are effectively closed off to you. You are barred from holding public office, a fundamental aspiration for many Roman men, and your testimony in court might be deemed less credible. It's a bit like having a permanent black mark on your record, preventing you from accessing certain opportunities, not because you lack talent or intelligence, but because your very existence, by its intimate nature, has rendered you dishonorable in the eyes of the dominant culture. This pervasive social stigma ensures that even if you gain your freedom, your past, and the perception of your role will follow you. A peculiar tidbit: actors, gladiators, and prostitutes were also typically considered infamed, placing your status, in a way, alongside other professions deemed to lack traditional Roman gravitas and moral standing. This pervasive stigma doesn't just affect your public life. It can also impact your private interactions. Other free citizens might be wary of associating too closely with you, fearing that your infamia could somehow taint their own reputation, while your patron might shield you from some of the harshest direct consequences. The underlying perception of your dishonor is a constant presence. Historians still argue whether the practical impact of infamia varied significantly depending on the social status and influence of your patron. A powerful patron might mitigate some effects, but the underlying social judgment would remain. Your life, therefore, is lived under a cloud of unspoken judgment, restricting your potential and reminding you daily of the societal disapproval tied to your role. Perhaps the most fundamental challenge you face as a concubiness, particularly if enslaved, is your almost complete lack of legal rights and protections. In ancient Rome, the concept of individual rights as we understand them today was largely absent, especially for those at the bottom of the social hierarchy. For you, this means your existence is precarious, built on the shifting sands of your patron's will, rather than any enshrined legal safeguards. You are truly vulnerable. Imagine a situation where you are physically harmed by your patron, or by another member of his household. There is no police force to call, no court to appeal to for justice on your behalf. Your patron, as your owner, holds ultimate authority, and any actions he takes against you are generally considered within his legal rights over his property. If he decides to beat you, or starve you, or inflict any form of mistreatment, the law will not intervene. It's a bit like being a fragile vase in a very clumsy household. If you break, there's no one to fix you, and you're simply replaced. This absence of legal personhood means you have no standing to bring a lawsuit, no right to defend yourself in a formal setting, and no power to seek redress for injustices. Even if you are a freedman, concubiness, while you possess more legal rights than an enslaved person, your position is still significantly weaker than a free-born Roman citizen. Your legal standing might allow you to own property or enter contracts, but your ongoing dependence on your patron and the stigma of infamia could severely limit the practical application of these rights. A peculiar tidbit is that while there were laws against extreme cruelty to slaves, these were often difficult to enforce and were more about preventing damage to valuable property rather than protecting the slave's well-being as an individual. Historians still argue whether certain Roman emperors or legal reforms ever genuinely sought to improve the legal protections for concubini specifically, but any such efforts were likely minimal and rarely challenged the underlying power imbalance. Your life is lived in a legal vacuum where justice is not a right, but a fleeting hope entirely dependent on the benevolence or lack thereof of your powerful patron. Your place within the complex ecosystem of a Roman household, particularly a wealthy one, is often a peculiar paradox. While you might be one of the most intimately connected individuals to the master of the house, you are simultaneously just one thread in a vast, intricate tapestry of slaves, freedmen, and family members. each with their own duties, hierarchies, and subtle power struggles. Understanding this internal dynamic is crucial to navigating your daily life. Imagine a large Roman villa teeming with life. There are the familiar urbana city slaves and familiar rustica country slaves, each with their specialized roles. You might interact with the atrium slave who greets guests, the cubicularies who manages the patron's bedchamber, or the numerous kitchen staff who prepare your elaborate meals. Each group has its own pecking order. A peculiar tidbit is that highly skilled or favored slaves often commanded a higher price on the market and could even inspire jealousy among other household staff. While you hold a unique position with the master, this doesn't automatically grant you authority over others, and in fact, it could make you a target. You might face resentment from slaves who perform more arduous tasks, or suspicion from those who believe you exert undue influence over the patron. Your immediate social circle might be limited to other favored slaves or freedmen who share a similar, albeit perhaps less intimate, connection to the patron. You learn to be discreet, to observe, and to avoid drawing unnecessary attention from those who might wish you ill. Historians still argue whether there was a formalized concubine position within the larger slave hierarchy, or if it was more fluid and based on individual favor. What is clear, however, is that your comfort and security often depended on maintaining a delicate balance within the household. Recognizing the unwritten rules and avoiding direct confrontations that could undermine your patron's favor or invite animosity from others. Your life within the domus is a constant negotiation of unspoken allegiances and rivalries. Within the intricate social web of a Roman household, your unique, intimate relationship with the patron often makes you a focal point for rivalries and jealousies. You are seen as having direct access to power, a conduit to the master's ear, and potentially a recipient of his valuable gifts and favors. This can breed resentment among other slaves, who might view your position as undeserved or as a threat to their own standing. Even freedmen and members of the patron's free family might eye you with suspicion or disdain. Imagine the thinly veiled glares from other domestic slaves, especially those who perform arduous physical labor, as you pass by in your fine clothes. Seemingly idle, they might gossip about you in hushed tones, speculating about the nature of your intimacy with the master, perhaps even spreading rumors to undermine your position. It's a bit like being the new favorite pet in a house full of older, working animals. You might get all the attention, but you also become the target of every envious growl. A peculiar tidbit is that Roman law, while not protecting slaves, did have provisions against inciting slaves to rebellion, which indicates an awareness of potential internal strife within households. These jealousies aren't just limited to fellow slaves. The patron's legal wife, if he has one, might see you as a rival for his affection or attention, even if your role is primarily sexual and not a threat to her social or domestic authority. Her disdain might manifest in subtle snubs, deliberate oversights, or even attempts to have you reassigned to less pleasant duties or even sold. His legitimate children might resent your presence, fearing you could somehow diminish their inheritance or influence their father's decisions. Historians still argue whether some concubini actively engaged in household politics, attempting to leverage their position for personal gain or to undermine rivals. But such maneuvers would have been incredibly risky and could easily backfire, leading to swift and harsh consequences. Your survival often depends on navigating these treacherous currents of jealousy with extreme caution and discretion, making yourself indispensable without appearing too powerful. In your precarious world as a concubiness, Gifts and favors from your patron are the shimmering, yet ultimately fragile, markers of your temporary security. These aren't entitlements. They are discretionary acts of generosity, expressions of his current affection or approval, and they can be withdrawn as swiftly as they are given. They represent a brief respite from the constant underlying vulnerability of your situation. Imagine receiving a delicate gold ring, a finely woven cloak, or even a sum of coins as a gift. These items are tangible symbols of your patron's favor, distinguishing you from other household slaves or dependents. Such gifts might afford you a brief sense of elevated status, a fleeting taste of luxury that reinforces your unique position. It's a bit like winning a lottery ticket that's only valid for a week. You can enjoy the temporary riches, but the grand prize is perpetually out of reach, and the ticket can be revoked at any moment. A peculiar tidbit is that while slaves could not legally own property, a master might allow them to manage a peculium, a small fund or property that the slave could use, ostensibly as their own, which sometimes even included gifts from the master himself. For a concubiness, such gifts, even if legally belonging to the patron, offered practical benefits and a measure of prestige. However, the very nature of these gifts underscores your dependence. They are not earned wages. They are manifestations of a powerful man's whim. If his mood shifts, if a new favorite appears, or if his financial circumstances change, these gifts could cease entirely, or worse, be reclaimed. Historians still argue whether such gifts were sometimes used by patrons as a way to subtly control or manipulate their concubini, ensuring continued loyalty and obedience. This constant awareness of the precariousness of your comforts means that even while enjoying a luxurious garment or a lavish meal, a part of you remains vigilant, knowing that every indulgence is contingent upon your patron's continuing satisfaction. A harsh, ever-present reality of your life as a concubiness is its inherently temporary nature. This isn't a long-term career path with prospects for advancement or retirement. It's a phase, a period dictated by the ebb and flow of your patrons' desires, social obligations, and changing circumstances. While some relationships might endure for years, many are fleeting, dissolving as quickly as they began. Imagine the subtle shifts in your patron's attention. Perhaps a new, younger slave arrives in the household, or he becomes preoccupied with political ambitions, or even suffers a personal loss that changes his priorities. These external events, entirely beyond your control, can dramatically alter your position. One day you might be his favored companion, the next you could find yourself overlooked or even completely ignored. It's a bit like being a popular sought-after toy, only to be replaced when a newer, shinier model comes along. You might be carefully placed back on the shelf, or perhaps even given to another child. A peculiar tidbit: Roman society had a strong cultural emphasis on gravitas and dignitas for adult-free males, often leading to a focus on family and public service, which could naturally push intimate relationships like yours into a more temporary, less central role as a man matured. This impermanence is particularly acute for free or freedman concubini, while enslaved individuals might simply be reassigned to other duties within the household or sold. A free concubiness risks losing their economic support and social standing entirely. They might have gained some wealth or connections during the relationship, but without the continued patronage, these advantages can quickly evaporate. Historians still argue whether there was a common age at which concubine relationships typically ended, or if it varied wildly based on individual circumstances and the patron's personal preferences. What is certain, however, is that you live, with the constant understanding that your unique position is provisional, requiring perpetual vigilance and a resigned acceptance that, at some point, this chapter of your life will inevitably close. One of the most common and often definitive reasons for the termination of your role as a concubiness is your patron's marriage. For a powerful Roman man, marriage was not primarily about romantic love. It was a fundamental social and political institution designed to produce legitimate heirs, cement alliances, and enhance one's social standing. The arrival of a wife into the household often meant a complete restructuring of domestic arrangements, and your intimate position was frequently among the first casualties. Imagine the atmosphere in the villa shifting as preparations for a wedding begin. The arrival of a new matrona, the lady of the house, brings with it a different set of expectations, a different set of eyes. Her presence often signifies a new domestic order, one where your informal, intimate role is either no longer tolerated or deemed inappropriate. You are, after all, a potential rival for your patron's attention, and your very presence might be seen as an affront to his new wife's honor and authority. It's a bit like having a special, unique piece of art on display in the living room, only for the new decorator to come in and decide it no longer fits the aesthetic, relegating it to storage. A peculiar tidbit is that while some Roman wives might have grudgingly tolerated their husbands' concubines, many would have seen it as their right to assert control over the household and remove any perceived threats to their position. Your fate in such a scenario could vary. If you are enslaved, you might be reassigned to other duties within the household, perhaps as a common servant, or even sold off to another master. If you are a freedman, your allowance might be cut, your lodging revoked, and your continued support from your patron might cease entirely. This could leave you in a precarious economic situation, forced to find a new means of support in a society that already views you with a degree of infamia. Historians still argue whether some patrons might have attempted to discreetly maintain their relationships with former concubinae after marriage, but such instances would have been exceptional and fraught with social risk. The marriage of your patron serves as a stark reminder of your expendability, a powerful social force that dictates the end of your intimate role. Another profoundly difficult aspect of your life as a concubiness in ancient Rome, particularly in contrast to more formally recognized unions, concerns children and legacy. The relationships you formed, no matter how intimate or emotionally resonant, lacked any legal recognition for offspring. This meant that any children born from such unions had no legal claim to their father's inheritance, name, or social status. For you, it's a stark reminder of your non-status in Roman society. Imagine the possibility of having a child with your patron. This child, despite sharing his blood, would not be recognized as a legitimate heir. If you were an enslaved concubiness, your child would automatically inherit your status. They would be born into slavery, belonging to your patron, just as you do. There is no legal path for your patron to acknowledge them as his legitimate offspring, nor to grant them the rights and privileges that come with being a Roman citizen. It's a bit like playing a game where you hit a home run, but it doesn't count because you're playing on the wrong field. The effort is there, the result is there, but the recognition is utterly absent. A peculiar tidbit is that while Roman law was strict on legitimate birth, some wealthy Romans might informally acknowledge children born to enslaved women, sometimes even manumitting them or providing for them, though this was purely at the master's discretion and offered no legal standing. If you are a freedman concubiness, The situation is slightly different, but the outcome is often the same. While your child would be born free, assuming your patron had not enslaved them, which would be highly unusual for a freedman's child, they still wouldn't be considered legitimate in the eyes of Roman law without a formal marriage between you and your patron, an impossibility given the social conventions of your relationship. This means no claim to his surname, no automatic inheritance, and no share in his patria potestas paternal power. Historians still argue whether some patrons might have made informal arrangements for their natural children with concubini through wills or trusts, but such provisions would have been vulnerable to legal challenge and entirely dependent on the patron's personal will, rather than any legal obligation. This stark reality means that even the deep human desire to pass on a legacy, to see your lineage continue, is denied to you in a formal sense, underscoring your profound lack of social and legal recognition. Now, let's turn our attention to the rare, almost mythical, exceptions to the general rule of anonymity and vulnerability that defined the life of a concubiness, the emperor's favorites. While the vast majority of male concubines lived lives of quiet subservience, a select few achieved an extraordinary, almost divine, level of recognition due to the immense, unchecked power of their imperial patrons. These were not typical experiences. They were phenomena, reflecting the absolute authority of the Roman emperor. Imagine being singled out by the most powerful man in the known world. An emperor whose word was law, whose whims could shape empires. Such a position would instantly elevate you far beyond the concerns of common citizens or even most senators. Your life would be transformed from obscurity to unparalleled prominence, albeit a prominence entirely dependent on imperial favor. It's a bit like being chosen from a vast crowd to become the personal assistant to a global superstar. Suddenly, you're flying on private jets and staying in opulent suites, but your continued access relies entirely on your boss's continued affection. A peculiar tidbit is that while many emperors had male favorites, not all elevated them to the degree of public veneration seen in certain famous cases. The most famous example, of course, is Antinous, the beloved companion of Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian, a highly cultured and powerful emperor, was deeply devoted to Antinous, and after Antinous's untimely death by drowning in the Nile, Hadrian's grief led to an unprecedented display of imperial power and personal devotion. He not only founded cities in Antinous's name, but also deified him, establishing a cult that spread throughout the Roman Empire. Historians still argue whether Hadrian's intense public mourning and deification of Antinous were expressions of genuine love, a calculated political move to unify his diverse empire, or a complex combination of both. For you, contemplating such a fate, it would be a distant, almost unimaginable dream, a level of imperial favoritism that transcended all normal social and legal conventions, proving that absolute power, in rare instances, could defy even the strictures of Roman societal norms regarding passive roles and the phenomenon of Antinous's deification stands as the ultimate testament to the extraordinary, almost supernatural power of a Roman emperor's personal will. For you, living as a typical concubiness, his story would be a whispered legend, a testament to what absolute, unbridled imperial affection could achieve, defying every social convention and legal restriction that normally governed your existence. It represents a zenith of favoritism, one that few, if any, others ever approached. Imagine the sheer audacity, the unprecedented nature of Hadrian's actions. Deification, the act of officially declaring someone a god, was typically reserved for emperors themselves after their death, or for figures of immense public utility and long-standing veneration, to deify a young, non-Roman male, whose primary relationship to the emperor was that of a concubiness, and who had died accidentally, was a move of colossal significance. It broadcast Hadrian's personal grief and devotion across the vast Roman Empire, establishing cults and temples dedicated to Antinous, commissioning countless statues, and even naming cities after him. It's a bit like a modern leader, not just mourning a beloved partner, but launching a global religious movement in their honor, complete with holidays and shrines. It utterly defied normal expectations, right? A peculiar tidbit is that Antinous was sometimes depicted with attributes of various gods, such as Dionysus or Apollo, reflecting his diverse cultic roles across the empire. This extraordinary event, however, served to highlight your own vulnerability rather than offer a pathway to similar elevation. Antinous's fate was a singular exception, born of a unique confluence of imperial power, personal grief, and perhaps a touch of megalomania on Hadrian's part. It was not a blueprint for other concubini. Rather, it underscored how utterly dependent such an elevation was on the specific, overwhelming power of the emperor, and how far removed it was from the normal experience of individuals like yourself. Historians still argue whether the widespread acceptance of Antinous's cult was due to genuine piety, political expediency, or simply a lack of real alternative in the face of imperial decree. For you, the story of Antinous would be a fleeting, beautiful dream, a reminder of what could be, while simultaneously emphasizing the grim reality of what was for almost everyone else in your position. Given your precarious status as a concubiness, the concept of social mobility's limits is a constant, unyielding barrier. While Roman society was not entirely rigid, particularly for some freedmen who could amass considerable wealth and influence, your specific role and its associated infamia meant that truly improving your inherent social standing was exceptionally difficult, if not impossible. The odds were stacked against you, and they were stacked high. Imagine striving for respectability, for recognition beyond your intimate association with a powerful man. You might dream of owning land, building a family, or even participating in local civic life, but these aspirations are continually thwarted by the ingrained prejudices of Roman society. Even if your patron grants you freedom and provides some financial assistance, the social stigma of having been a concubiness follows you like an unwanted shadow. It's a bit like trying to climb a very greasy pole. You might make some progress, but the moment you falter, you slide right back down. A peculiar tidbit: while some freedmen could become quite wealthy as merchants or artisans, they were still often viewed with a degree of condescension by the traditional Roman elite, and their descendants usually needed several generations to fully shed the taint of slavery. Your path to genuine social advancement is blocked by the very nature of your past. Holding political office, serving in the legions if you were a citizen, or marrying into a respected family would be incredibly challenging, if not entirely out of reach. These avenues of upward mobility typically required a clean reputation, a lineage free from the stain of perceived dishonor, and a consistent demonstration of Roman virtue, manliness that was often incompatible with a passive sexual role. Historians still argue whether there were specific regional differences in how strictly infamia was applied to former concubini, but generally the social barriers were formidable across the empire. Thus, while individual acts of kindness from your patron might offer temporary comfort, the broader structure of Roman society ensures that your potential for truth lasting social elevation remains severely curtailed. While much of your life as a concubiness takes place within the private confines of your patron's household, you also occasionally accompany him into the more public sphere, particularly to the baths and other socializing spaces. These outings, while seemingly a chance for relaxation or social interaction, are still very much an extension of your service and a careful negotiation of public perception. Imagine stepping into the bustling, echoing halls of a Roman public bathhouse. The air is thick with steam, the scent of olive oil and sweat, and the murmur of countless voices. Your patron might spend hours here, moving through the various rooms, the tepidarium warm room, caldarium hot room, and frigidarium cold room, engaging in conversations, exercising, or simply relaxing. Your role is to attend to his needs, perhaps carrying his towels, strigil, and oils, assisting him with his ablutions, or simply standing by, ready to serve. It's a bit like being a valet at a modern-day exclusive club, always present, but never quite part of the inner circle of members. A peculiar tidbit is that Roman bathhouses were not just places for hygiene. They were central hubs for social networking, business deals, and even political intrigue. Your presence at the baths is a subtle display of your patron's wealth and status. To have a handsome, attentive concubiness at one's side could be a quiet boast among peers. However, for you, it means being constantly on display under the scrutinizing gaze of other bathers. While your patron might be praised for his virility, you might draw whispered judgments, your passive role in your intimate relationship making you subject to the infamia we discussed earlier. Historians still argue whether some concubini might have used these public appearances to subtly network or gather information for their patrons. But any such activities would have required extreme discretion and caution to avoid drawing negative attention. Even in these seemingly relaxed environments, your existence remains a performance. Your every move observed and implicitly judged by the rigid social codes of Rome. Beyond the baths, your presence at dinner parties and other forms of entertainment is another common aspect of your life as a concubiness. Roman banquets, or convivia, were elaborate affairs, rich with food, wine, conversation, and often entertainment. Your role here is to contribute to your patron's prestige and pleasure, albeit often as a silent participant or a carefully managed performer. Imagine the lavish setting, triclinia with luxurious couches, tables laden with exotic dishes, and the soft glow of oil lamps. Guests recline, engaging in witty banter, reciting poetry, or listening to music. You might be positioned near your patron, ready to fill his cup with wine, offer him a morsel of food, or fan him if the room grows warm. You are part of the scenery, yes, but a very particular kind of living decor, reflecting your patron's refined tastes and his ability to command beauty and service. It's a bit like a well-choreographed play, where you have a specific, silent part that enhances the main performance. A peculiar tidbit is that some convivia would feature professional entertainers, like dancers or musicians, but having one's own concubiness with such talents could be a personal and exclusive delight for the host. Your participation might extend to more active forms of entertainment if you possess specific talents. Perhaps you have a beautiful singing voice, are skilled with a lyre, or can recite Greek poetry from memory. Your patron might call upon you to perform for his guests, showcasing your abilities as a testament to his good taste and the quality of his household. While this might bring you a moment in the spotlight, it also underscores your role as an object of display, a source of entertainment for others. Historians still argue whether the concubiness at a dinner party sometimes served as an informal spy for their patron, gathering information from overheard conversations. But any such role would have been incredibly subtle and risky. Even amidst the merriment, your vigilance never truly wavers, always attuned to your patron's subtle cues and the expectations of his esteemed company. Your life as a concubiness might not always be confined to the city or the domestic sphere. Depending on your patron's standing and responsibilities, you could find yourself pulled along on his travels and campaigns, experiencing a different facet of Roman life, far from the familiar comforts and intrigues of the villa. These journeys, while potentially offering a glimpse of the wider world, also introduce new challenges and reaffirm your dependent status. Imagine leaving the familiar cityscape, perhaps joining your patron on a journey to his country estate villa rustica for a period of relaxation, or even accompanying him on a more formal trip to a distant province if he held a governorship or military command. These travels could involve long, arduous journeys by land, jolting along in a litter or carriage, or by sea, braving the unpredictable Mediterranean winds. Your role would remain constant: to attend to his needs, provide companionship, and ensure his comfort wherever he goes. It's a bit like being a high-end personal assistant on a perpetual road trip. Exciting new scenery, but still, you're always working, always catering to someone else's schedule. A peculiar tidbit is that some Roman generals were known to bring their favored companions, including concubini, on military campaigns, sometimes sparking gossip or disapproval from more traditionalist elements of the army. On campaign, your life would take on an even more Spartan quality. While your patron might still enjoy certain luxuries, you would be living in tents, facing the rigors of military life, albeit without the direct combat responsibilities of a soldier. Your presence would be for his personal solace and recreation after the day's duties. Historians still argue whether the close quarters and shared hardships of travel and campaign life might have sometimes fostered deeper, more genuine bonds between patrons and their concubini, but any such bond would still be framed by the fundamental power imbalance. These journeys, while breaking the monotony of household life, serve as a potent reminder that your entire existence is migratory, dictated by the movements and demands of the man who owns your loyalty and your body. In a world without modern medicine or comprehensive healthcare, your medical care and health as a concubiness are entirely at the discretion of your patron, while a valuable slave, especially one in such an intimate role, might receive better care than a common laborer. This provision is not a right, but an investment, an effort to protect his property and ensure your continued ability to serve his needs. Your well-being is viewed through the lens of utility, not inherent human dignity. Imagine falling ill within the Roman household. You wouldn't have access to public hospitals or independent doctors. Instead, your treatment would depend on the resources available within your patron's domus. Wealthy households often employed their own Medici, doctors, who might be Greek slaves or freedmen, or they would call upon a trusted physician from outside. Your treatment could range from herbal remedies and poultices to more invasive and often painful surgical procedures. It's a bit like a prized racing horse getting top-tier veterinary care. The focus is on getting the asset back to optimal performance, not necessarily on its subjective experience of pain. A peculiar tidbit is that some Roman medical texts discuss various remedies for ailments that would be common in crowded urban environments, showing an awareness of public health, but individual care remained largely private. If your illness or Injury rendered you permanently unable to fulfill your duties as a concubiness. Your fate could be grim. You might be reassigned to less demanding tasks, or, in more extreme cases, sold off to someone who needed a less physically demanding slave, or even abandoned if deemed worthless. Historians still argue whether there was a moral expectation for patrons to provide for their aging or infirm slaves, beyond the purely economic calculation of their value, but any such compassion was entirely voluntary. Your body is a tool, and its health is maintained not for your own comfort, but for the continued satisfaction and convenience of your patron. This fundamental reality means your physical well-being is another chain in your complex web of dependence. The inevitable end of the relationship with your patron is a looming reality that defines your existence as a concubiness. This conclusion can come in various forms, none of which offer you much control, and all of which fundamentally alter the course of your life, often thrusting you into a new, uncertain future. Your unique, intimate position is almost certainly temporary, and its cessation marks a pivotal, often jarring, transition. Imagine the moment your patron's interest wanes. Perhaps he takes a new lover, finds a wife, or simply grows bored. He might stop summoning you, becoming distant, or assigning you more mundane, less intimate duties. This subtle withdrawal of favor can be a slow, agonizing process, leaving you in a limbo of uncertainty, wondering what your new role will be, or if you will have any role at all. It's a bit like being a star performer in a long-running play, only for the director to quietly start cutting your lines until you're barely on stage anymore. The show goes on, but your part has effectively ended. A peculiar tidbit is that some Roman patrons might subtly encourage their former concubini to marry and settle down, perhaps providing a dowry for a freedwoman as a way to transition them out of the intimate role while still maintaining a veneer of patronage. More abruptly, your patron might decide to sell you. This is a common outcome for enslaved concubini who are no longer desired. You could find yourself at a slave market, stripped of your finery, and exposed to the harsh scrutiny of potential buyers. Your new owner might have entirely different expectations, perhaps assigning you to grueling manual labor, or continuing a similar intimate role but with a far less benevolent hand. If you are a freedman, the end of the relationship could mean the cessation of all financial support, leaving you to fend for yourself in a society where your past still carries a significant stigma. Historians still argue whether some patrons felt a lasting moral obligation to provide for concubini they had discarded, or if such care was rare and largely driven by practical concerns like preventing them from becoming a public burden. The cessation of your intimate role, regardless of its manner, is a sharp reminder that your life is ultimately not your own, and your path forward is at the whim of others. So, what truly happens after the curtain falls on your time as a concubiness? Survival beyond patronage is a deeply uncertain and challenging prospect, particularly if you're left to navigate the rigid social structures of Roman society without the protective, albeit often stifling, umbrella of a powerful benefactor. Your options are limited, and your past casts a long shadow. Imagine finding yourself suddenly adrift. If you were enslaved and sold, your fate is entirely in the hands of your new owner. This could mean a life of harsh manual labor, perhaps in the fields or mines, or as a common domestic servant. The relative comfort and perhaps even intimacy you once experienced would be a distant memory, replaced by drudgery and anonymity. It's a bit like being a delicate hothouse flower suddenly transplanted into a rocky, unyielding soil. Adapting to the new environment would be incredibly difficult, and survival far from guaranteed. A peculiar tidbit is that while some very wealthy Romans owned vast numbers of slaves for agricultural or industrial purposes, they often cared little for the individual well-being of these lower-tier slaves, focusing more on their productive output. If you were a freedman, your situation is different but still precarious. You might attempt to establish a small business, perhaps as a shopkeeper, a craftsman, or even as a scribe, leveraging any skills you acquired while in your patron's household. However, the infamia associated with your past role would make it difficult to gain full acceptance or trust in mainstream society. You might find it hard to form meaningful social connections, and marriage to a respectable Roman woman would likely be out of the question. Historians still argue whether some freedman concubini might have managed to achieve a quiet, respectable life after their patronage ended, perhaps in a different city where their past was less known. But this would have required immense resilience and good fortune. Ultimately, your survival after patronage is a testament to your personal fortitude, a stark struggle for agency and dignity in a world that offered you very little of either, reminding you constantly of the path you once walked. As we bring our journey through the life of a male concubine in ancient Rome to a close, what becomes undeniably clear is the profound vulnerability and complexity that defined your existence. Your life was a delicate tapestry woven from threads of dependence, temporary luxury, social stigma, and an almost complete lack of personal agency. From the lavishness of your patron's villa to the potential harshness of his rejection, your fate was never truly your own. You existed within a peculiar intersection of desire and disdain, desired for your beauty, your companionship, your physical intimacy, yet often disdained by the broader society for the very nature of your role. You were a living testament to your patron's power and tastes, but a constant reminder of your own precariousness. The comforts you experienced were always provisional, never truly secure, and the legal recognition you lacked made you, in essence, an invisible entity in the eyes of the Roman state. Historians still argue whether some patrons might have felt genuine affection for their concubini, seeing them as more than mere property. But even if such feelings existed, they rarely translated into lasting security or fundamental changes. To your subordinate status, your story is one of quiet resilience, of navigating a world where you were simultaneously a prized possession and a potential outcast. You learned to read subtle cues, to anticipate needs, and to exist in a constant state of vigilance, always aware that your comfort, and indeed your very survival, hinged entirely on the whims of another. The whispers of infamia followed you, and the spectre of a sudden dismissal or sale was an ever-present shadow. You were an intimate part of a powerful man's life, yet always on the periphery of true Roman citizenship and societal acceptance. This quiet struggle for dignity within a system designed to deny it is a powerful, if often forgotten, narrative from the annals of history. Now, as the echoes of ancient Rome begin to fade, allow the images to soften, blurring at the edges. Let the distant sounds of the bustling forum, the murmurs of the bathhouse, and the hushed whispers of the villa dissolve into the quiet of your own space. Feel the tension in your shoulders begin to release, your breathing deepen and slow. There's nothing more to ponder, no more history to untangle tonight. Just the gentle hum of the world, softly settling around you. Let your mind drift, light as a feather, across the quiet expanse of sleep. All the complexities, all the vulnerabilities of a bygone era are now simply whispers in the dark. Rest now, deeply and completely, sweet dreams.